everyone, and welcome to my review for Arrow Season 8, the final ever season of Arrow. The last ever Arrow season review we're going to have on this channel, which is crazy to think, unless we do some like retrospective thing many years down the line. But yeah, this is going to be the last review we do of Arrow ever, really, which is crazy to think and insane to think that it's been 8 years since we've been on this journey, since 2012 all the way till 2020. I know this video is very late. Like I mentioned in previous videos, I did actually record my review for Arrow Season 8 a long time ago, not long after the show ended, and then the file got corrupted and I never got spare time to go back and actually redo the review until now. So let's just get straight into it and straight into the final ever season of Arrow. Now I'm actually going to mix this review up a little bit because I'm not really going to talk about the story for Arrow Season 8, because Arrow's final season is very much a season that is trying to do a lot of things. It is trying to obviously set the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's also trying to set up elements that will be continued in the potential spin-off with the Green Arrow and the Canaries, whilst also trying to end Arrow as a show. And the fact that the show was doing all of this with a shorter season of 10 episodes compared to the usual 22 or 23 that we get in the CW shows, yeah, I was quite concerned going into this season that even though I was happy with the reduced episode count because it would mean less filler, I was also worried that we wouldn't actually have enough time to adapt all these elements. I've got friends of mine that really love Arrow Season 8, and there are friends of mine, one in particular who will not be named, who thinks it's the worst season of the show. Now, I personally don't agree with that opinion at all, but I will admit that this season of Arrow is flawed, and in a reversal of what I usually do with my reviews of Arrow seasons, I'm actually going to start with the negatives first, because was this a perfect season of Arrow? No, not at all. There were many problems with this season, as there usually are with a lot of other TV shows with seasons that I enjoy. There are ultimately going to be negatives, and trust me, there were some with Arrow Season 8, and some that I did find quite irritating in the long run, which I will go through right now. I think my biggest problem with the entire season is, as I mentioned earlier, I think the season spent too much time trying to do too much with too little. There was a lot of setup for Crisis, which made sense given the setup in Season 7 of Oliver sacrificing himself and doing that deal with the Monitor for the upcoming Crisis, so it made sense in that regard. But because of the fact that not only do we have a reduced episode count, but because of all the other plots that were going on at the same time, it did feel like this plotline did take up a little bit too much of the season. Even though it was very well done and it was something that I did enjoy, I think it did hinder the plot as well in other areas which I would have liked to have seen. I think mainly with the resolution of some characters, which I think could have been more evenly spread out than what we got in the final product. Even though I did, like I said, I did enjoy the actual setup, it was just a bit underwhelming that it did come at the compromise of potentially having more character development and better send-offs for certain characters in certain regards. Another problem that I did have with this season as well was that it did spend a bit too much time as well trying to set up the potential spin-off with the Green Arrow and the Canaries. This is something that obviously had been set up sort of in Season 7 with the flash forwards, and then in this season they expand it further by bringing the characters from the flash forwards to the present day. Wasn't as huge a fan of it when it initially started in Season 8, but as the season went forward, I got used to it more and more. But at the same time, I do feel like they spent a little bit too much time trying to set this up. Even though it did give good development to Laurel and Mia, I do feel like they maybe should have cut down on the amount of time that they spent with this storyline in retrospective when I compare it to other stuff. I didn't like the flash forwards either in the first 3 episodes. I kind of felt like they were a bit tacked on. I'm not a fan of the flash forwards at all, to be perfectly honest. If you've seen my Season 7 review, you will know that I wasn't a fan of them as they went on throughout the season. And they're here for the first 3 episodes, and I just wasn't a big fan of them. I didn't really care about them all that much, and I didn't really find them very engaging. And the fact, like I said, after the 3rd episode, they're gone, and then those flash forward events are rewritten / retconned by the end of Crisis Infinite Earths, it just kind of makes me think that all that time we spent there was a bit pointless. But at the same time, because it was such a short stay, it wasn't something that irked me loads about the season. It was more of a gripe that I had rather than a full-on negative. And there were elements as well about the series finale which I wasn't a huge fan of, mainly in the way that they decided to bring back pretty much every past character on the show when Oliver became the Spectre in Crisis on Infinite Earths and rebooted the universe. I wasn't a fan of that, mainly because it took away a lot of the stakes that the show had set up over the years. Having characters such as Moira and Tommy come back just didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel right that they had to come up with that excuse to have all these characters at Oliver's funeral. I think a better way to do it would have been to have versions of these characters from alternate Earths coming over to Earth Prime to mourn Oliver. I think that would have been a better way to do it, because not only would they have been able to have all of these characters back, they would have also been able to keep the stakes and the emotions and the impact of the entire 8 seasons of the show. Whereas with this finale, it does feel like, in a way, they kind of undo all of that just for fan service sake, which does annoy me a little bit, but at the same time, I understand why they did it. I just think they could have written it in a better way. And there were some characters as well that didn't get as much attention as I would have liked them to have seen. Again, this mainly came down to the fact that the season was trying to set up the crossover and a potential spin-off at the same time. I think the two characters that really suffered with this the most for me personally were probably Renee and Dinah. Although admittedly Renee does get a little bit of a story with him running for mayor of Star City. Dinah, on the other hand, literally has nothing. She has nothing to do pretty much for the entire season, and it's honestly a shame, because I keep on saying this, Juliana Harkavy is a good actress, and you can tell that she cares about this character, but the writers literally give her nothing to do, and this season is pure proof of that. To be fair, she does get a bit to do in the backdoor pilot episode in episode 9, but literally other than that, she does nothing the entire season. I'm pretty sure she only makes about 4 appearances in the entire season, which kind of just goes to show how little of importance she honestly had to this show. She's either been written poorly or had nothing done with her at all, so it was underwhelming to see her not really get anything. Although again, it's not a major problem, because we could potentially see her get good character development in the potential spin-off if it does go ahead. So I'm kind of left open on that regard, because of course we could still potentially see more of her character. But in terms of what she was given in this final season, yeah, it wasn't anything exactly mind-blowing. And that pretty much wraps up my issues with Arrow Season 8. I just wanted to get them out of the way with first, because I know a lot of people, like I say, have mixed opinions on this season, and I felt like I wanted to just get my negative opinions out first, so I can kind of end this last ever season review of Arrow talking about the positives, because surprisingly, there was a lot I really liked about the season, and overall, I thought this was a great season. Yes, there are problems, but for me, those problems just simply didn't outweigh how much of a great time I had watching this season. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. And what I liked the most about it was how they decided to basically make the entire season act as a series finale. Oliver's saying goodbye to all of these characters each episode, so they're not necessarily cramming it into the finale. They're kind of squeezing it out in an appropriate way across all of the 10 episodes, which I thought was a really good way to do it, with particularly the premiere episode of episode 1 where it takes place on Earth 2 Star City, or Starling City as it's called there. Wow, that was brilliant. That's probably the best premiere episode Arrow's ever had. It's probably one of my top 10 favourite episodes of Arrow. It was such a good episode, and such a good way of opening up the season to the main storyline we were going to have, which was to travel to all these different events and places. It was just set up in such a really good way in that episode. It was just brilliantly well done, seeing the alternate version of these characters and Oliver getting the chance to say goodbye to them, particularly the Earth 2 version of Tommy and Moira, setting up the stakes that would come into play throughout the entire season with the antimatter and the anti-monitor. Even though we don't see him this season, his presence is felt, which I think was the best way they could have set him up, given the type of villain that he is and his ultimate purpose. In fact, there wasn't really a weak episode throughout this entire season. I mean, the only episode that I wouldn't say was great was probably episode 4, but literally other than that, I enjoyed every other episode of this season. Every other episode was at least really good, apart from episode 4, which I felt was okay to good. Every other one was either good to fantastic, which was just so nice to see. And I think in terms of quality-wise, it's probably one of the most consistent seasons of Arrow for quality wise. I'd probably put it up there with season 1 and season 2 in terms of its consistency, because I love season 5, but there are some dog shit episodes laid in that season, whereas season 8 doesn't have a bad episode, which I have to give it credit for. And just that consistency that they had through it was just so brilliant. All the characters that they brought back, like I say, in the first episode, we had Moira and Tommy and Adrian Chase and Malcolm Merlin. And in episode 2, you had Katana returning, you had China White coming back. In episode 3, you had Thea coming back, you had Talia coming back. Episode 4 kind of dealt with the flash forward characters coming into the present day. Episode 5 had Anatoly back. Episode 6 had Quentin back. Episode 7 went back to Lian Yu, and we had Billy Wintergreen and Friars and Yao Fei. It was just so good how they brought back all these characters, and it was kind of like this flashback montage to the greatest hits of Arrow, but also taking the time as well for Oliver to say goodbye to these characters, which again was just a really nice and refreshing way to go through it, and it just hit me in the feels. I was either tearing up or crying throughout every single episode throughout this season, which is kind of testament to how good the writing was, that they were able to invoke that much emotion out of me, because they did such a good job of it. And yeah, I'm even getting teary-eyed even thinking about it right now. That tells you how good it was. We even had Roy back as well, which I really, really liked. He wasn't used as much as I would have maybe liked to have seen, but I think that's more the fanboy within me wanting to see more of Roy, but I like what they did with him and with his character. Can we also talk about the suit this season? This is, without question, the best Green Arrow suit in the entire show. I know people really, really love the season 5 to 7 suit, but for me, this one's even better, because I just love how it incorporates elements of all of the suits that we've had up until now. The fact that he's got the season 1 bow as well. It's just such a badass suit, and I love it so much, especially because in episode 6, we actually get to see it in the daytime, and it just looks as good in the daytime as it does at night. It is such a brilliant suit. And Oliver, again, was just a badass this season. He went back to being a badass. You know, it was just so many great moments. I mean, I remember especially in episode 6 where he had the trick arrow, where it just like turned into these little mini projectiles that exploded. Oh my god, it was just so good. I'm getting goosebumps and so psyched up talking about this season, because it was just that good. I really loved this season. Like I said, the suit was just bloody amazing. The action as well. The action was great. This was so much better than season 7, because I said in season 7 the action was good sometimes, but it kind of went lacking towards the back half of the season. The action throughout this entire season was brilliant, especially episodes that James Bamford directed, which were episodes 1, 7, and 10. The action was brilliant. There's an action sequence in the series finale, which I've already discussed if you've seen my series finale review, but that is one of the best action sequences Arrow has ever done. Like, he pretty much takes on about, from what I could count rewatching it, about 30 people, which was absolutely insane. But the action is just as brilliant as ever, and the stunt team, and kudos to all of them for all the brilliant work they've done throughout these 8 seasons, and James Bamford himself, they outdid themselves, and they did such a phenomenal job once again. And this season really did get the emotion out of me. I really was tearing up throughout so many points this entire season because of the farewells, and I just loved, like I said earlier, how they spread them out throughout all these episodes, because I've seen people complain that, oh, the finale didn't have as many farewells as I would have liked. I think these people honestly didn't remember the first 7 episodes of the season, because they basically were the farewells. Oliver said goodbye to Anatoly, he said goodbye to Diggle, to William, and to Mia, and to all these other characters. He had his goodbyes in that episode, and I just, I like how they spread it out, because it allowed for there to be really emotional moments in every single episode. And yeah, it worked for me, and I liked the fact that the season took its time in that regard to go with that approach, and it was something that I really liked. And in terms of wrapping this up for the positives, we've got to talk about the favourite characters. Once again, Oliver's great this season, and I loved how this season focused on his internal struggle to give in to fate, because this season is very much a supernatural season of Arrow. It's far more supernatural than what we had in previous seasons, and I've seen people label that as a complaint. I honestly feel like season 4 is more of a bigger departure than season 8 is from what Arrow used to be. This season of Arrow, it has fantasy elements within it, but the difference is that it's still a grounded show at its roots, and the way that it's incorporated and the mature storytelling and themes really helps to still ground this show despite the fact that there's these supernatural events happening, whereas with Series 4, the writing was utterly so atrocious that the sci-fi just enhanced how terrible it was. Yeah, getting back onto Oliver's story, his whole season is basically about him learning to accept the fact that he can't change fate. He can't change what has to happen, because he spends pretty much the first half of Season 8 thinking that he can outrun the Monitor's words, that he can cheat death, because essentially he's not prepared for it. And episode 6, which again, like episode 1, is a fucking brilliant episode, he realizes in his conversations with Quentin, or one of the many conversations he has with Quentin, all of which I teared up during, where he realizes that he can't do it. He has to accept what needs to happen. He has to accept that he has to make the sacrifice for the people that he cares about. And it was such a brilliant storyline, because it really kind of brings his character full circle from that person who got off Lian Yu and was so focused on the mission that he could basically write his own destiny. Here he's learning to accept that there are things that he can't change, and again, it was so brilliant. And Stephen Amell's acting this season, once again, fantastic. To see the transformation in him as an actor over these 8 years has been phenomenal, because I still stand by my words when I say this, but Stephen Amell wasn't that amazing at the beginning of Season 1 as an actor. It was more towards the end of that season where he really grew into this role, but you compare him now to then, his acting has improved without question. And Oliver this season, I've really loved him. He was easily a standout character for me. But the MVP, the absolute queen of this season, is without question Earth 2 Laurel. She honestly is one of my favourite characters, and I loved her this season. I loved how much of a big role she got in this season, with her coping with the destruction of her Earth and how she's affected by that. She has her loyalty to Oliver tested, and she ends up siding with Oliver, and it was just so good to see her character get so much material and so much development, because I already thought when they completed her redemption arc in Season 7, I was like, where can they go with her? I love her character, but where are they going to go with her next? They knocked it out of the park even more with what they did with her this season. The only small gripe with her story is that I think she should have been in the crossover, because that would have been just the icing on top of the cake in terms of ending her storyline, where she passes all these tests by the Monitor, and her reward is that she becomes a Paragon, and she's part of the final battle at the end of time. For me, that should have been the ending for her character, but I'm not necessarily mad that that's not the case, because of the fact that, because we'll probably see her in this spin-off, we'll get even more development with her character. I think it was more that if we didn't have that spin-off, I think it would have been even better had they included Earth 2 Laurel and made her a Paragon. But again, that's just more of a personal thing to me, rather than something that I was furious that didn't happen. But yeah, I loved Laurel in this season. Easily for me the best character of the entire season. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on Arrow Season 8. The final season, the final ever season review. And for a final score rating, this is going to be difficult, because I have actually rewatched the season before I've recorded this, and I've thought very hard and carefully about what rating I'm going to give it. But I've come to my conclusion, and I'm going to give this season an 8.5 out of 10. I really did like this season. Like I said earlier, there are problems with this season, as I did mention at the beginning. But for me overall, I think considering the tasks that this season had on its hands and all the things it had to do within a shorter episode span, I think it's amazing that it came out as well as it did, and I really had a great time with this season. Again, it's not quite the best season of the show, but it was really enjoyable, and it's head and shoulders above some of the other seasons that we've had. An 8.5 feels very, very earned for me personally, and with that, we have officially ended our Arrow season reviews. I have now reviewed every single season of this show, but we actually do have another video for Arrow coming up soon, hopefully, and that is now going to be, given the fact that we've reviewed every season of Arrow, it now only feels right that we go ahead and make our ranking on every season of Arrow, from worst to best. So that is going to be the next video we do for Arrow. When it's going to come out, I have no idea, but it will come whenever I can be asked to actually make the video. But yeah, that is going to be the next Arrow video, so keep your eyes out for that, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that notification so that you don't miss that video when it does come out. I want to thank you all very much for watching my review of Arrow Season 8, and I'll hope to see you all again for the next video. Goodbye.